In 2010, Ford made a decision that terrified Wall Street, enraged their competitors, and risked the most profitable vehicle in automotive history. They were going to rebuild the F-150, a truck that generated an estimated 90% of Ford's global profits, out of aluminum, a material that 97% of body shops couldn't repair. What nobody outside Ford knew was that they'd already been secretly testing this for 2 years. Mining crews in Nevada were driving prototype trucks and had no idea they were guinea pigs in a $3 billion experiment approved by then CEO Alan Mulally. But the craziest part isn't what Ford risked. It's what their biggest competitor did next, a marketing attack so aggressive it became an industry punchline when their own engineers betrayed them. This is the story of the covert testing, the factory rebuilt in 4 weeks, and the attack campaign that accidentally proved Ford was right. Before Ford committed billions to this gamble, they needed to answer one question. Would real customers, not engineers, actually notice the difference? The move wasn't just about performance. Mounting CAFE fuel economy standards meant automakers needed to shed weight while maintaining capability, so they ran an experiment straight out of a Folgers commercial. Starting in late 2011, Ford embedded 6 prototype F-150s at 3 customer work sites: mining companies, construction crews, utility workers hauling equipment through Appalachian mountains. The trucks looked identical to standard steel F-150s because the aluminum panels were cast to match exactly, and Ford told nobody. Not the companies, not the drivers, not even the mechanics servicing them. 2 trucks went to Barrick Gold's mines in Nevada, where they endured desert heat and racked up 200,000 miles hauling mining equipment. 2 more went to Walsh Construction, building a hydroelectric dam. The final pair went to a North Carolina utility company, reading meters through mountain roads 200 miles a day. For 2 years, not a single person noticed anything different, and then one afternoon at the Nevada mine, everything almost fell apart. A survey crew walked up to one of the trucks and tried to attach their magnetized GPS loggers to the bed. The magnets wouldn't stick. They ran their hands across the metal, looked at each other, and asked if this was some kind of composite. Ford's undercover engineer, a guy named Dennis Cancier, who'd been visiting these sites for 2 years without ever revealing what he was actually doing, stood there and lied to their faces. Here's why this mattered. These weren't automotive journalists doing a weekend test. These were guys throwing heavy tools over the tailgate every single day, dragging chains, hauling equipment that would destroy a normal truck bed. If they couldn't tell the difference, Ford had proof that everyday buyers never would either. The testing also revealed something Ford hadn't anticipated, a flaw that could have killed the entire program. The original bed floor was too thin, and heavy tools were denting it. Trailer hitches were leaving marks. Ford's engineers took one look at the damage reports and realized they had a choice: add weight back to fix the problem or find another way. They increased the thickness by 50%, and it was still hundreds of pounds lighter than steel. After 2 years of covert testing across hundreds of thousands of real-world miles, the companies never noticed they were part of an experiment. The trucks performed identically, and the secret held. Ford had proven the material worked. Now came the part that actually kept executives up at night, figuring out how to rebuild 2 massive factories while keeping dealerships stocked with trucks, and doing it before Wall Street lost faith completely. You can't weld aluminum the same way you weld steel. The entire manufacturing process, every robot, every tool, every technique had to change, and Ford was about to attempt something no automaker had ever done at this scale. If you're liking my deep dive, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting below. It helps me more than you know. Thanks a lot. On August 22nd, 2014, the last steel F-150 rolled off the Dearborn line. Here's the part that sounds made up. Before that truck even reached the end of the plant, crews were literally tearing down equipment behind it as it moved. The shutdown and rebuild happened simultaneously. What followed was the most aggressive factory transformation in automotive history, and Ford had given themselves an impossible deadline. Over 1,100 tractor trailers hauled out old machinery. Scrap removal teams worked 24 hours a day, moving 383 loads in 5 days. And while that was happening, new equipment was already arriving. The steel F-150 required roughly 5,000 spot welds per truck, that familiar crackle and spark of metal fusing to metal. The aluminum version would use something completely different: 2,200 self-piercing rivets plus 350 feet of structural adhesive, which was 3 times more glue than any previous model. 500 new robots went in, mounted overhead instead of on the floor. The massive welding cages that once surrounded every station disappeared. And here's the detail that matters for anyone who's ever worked in a factory. The plant became eerily quiet. No sizzle of spot welding, no sparks, no fumes. Workers said it felt like a different building. The real risk wasn't the technology, though. It was the clock. Traditional factory changeovers take 14 to 16 weeks. Ford's body shop core conversion had to happen in 4 because every day that Dearborn wasn't producing trucks, Ford was bleeding money and dealers were screaming for inventory. Meanwhile, and Wall Street was already panicking. Ford stock had dropped 15% since the project was announced. Morgan Stanley warned the changeover was unlikely to go as smooth as investors anticipate. Bank of America pulled Ford from its recommended list. 4 weeks. That's how long the core conversion took. By January 2015, Dearborn was running at full speed. The Kansas City plant followed with a $1.1 billion conversion. Combined capacity, over 700,000 aluminum F-150s per year. Ford had pulled off the manufacturing miracle. The trucks were rolling, the dealers were happy, and that's exactly when their biggest competitor decided to go nuclear. GM saw an opportunity. Ford had taken an enormous risk. The trucks were new, and the repair infrastructure wasn't ready. If Chevy could make buyers afraid of aluminum, they could steal market share before Ford's gamble paid off. Meanwhile, Ram was watching quietly, waiting to see if the aluminum experiment would succeed. In July 2015, Chevrolet launched 3 attack ads simultaneously. The first one showed focus groups choosing a steel cage over an aluminum one, and then releasing a 700-pound grizzly bear to prove the point. The second mocked a superhero called the Almighty Aluminum Man, and comic book fans literally laughed at him on camera. The third featured NFL Hall of Famer Howie Long, presenting data that F-150s cost $1,755 more to repair and took 34 extra days in the shop. For anyone shopping for a truck in 2015, this was exactly the fear GM wanted to create. What happens when something goes wrong with this experimental new material? GM wasn't done. In June 2016, they escalated with a demonstration so brutal it went viral, the Toolbox test. A Chevy rep dropped a large toolbox corner first into both beds on camera, and the aluminum F-150 punctured. In 13 of 14 demonstrations, the same thing happened. They dropped 825 pounds of concrete landscape blocks from 5 feet into both beds. The F-150 averaged 4.3 punctures per drop. The campaign blanketed 2,400 movie theaters, NASCAR races, MLB games, Stanley Cup Finals, and ESPN Sports Center. 4-page newspaper wraps ran in Detroit and USA Today. This is where the story should have ended badly for Ford. A massive corporation with unlimited marketing budget, targeting their most profitable product, with video evidence of punctured truck beds. And then something strange happened. After the June 2016 ad blitz launched, Ford F-Series sales increased each quarter. Silverado sales decreased. Ford's market share climbed while Chevy's dropped from 27.5% to 21.6%. The attack campaign didn't just fail, it backfired. The reason why is the most embarrassing detail in modern automotive history, because GM's own engineers were about to humiliate their marketing department in front of the entire industry. While GM's marketing team was spending millions mocking aluminum trucks, something very different was happening inside GM's engineering division. Ford spokesman Mike Levine responded to the attack ads with one line: "When you're the market leader for 39 years, competitors sometimes try to take shots at you with marketing stunts." What he didn't say, what Ford probably knew but couldn't prove at the time, was that GM's own engineers were already working on aluminum trucks. They weren't just researching the idea either. They were actively reverse engineering Ford's work. GM engineers had toured Ford's Dearborn plant with stopwatches and trained eyes, according to their own executive chief engineer Tim Herrick. They'd purchased F-150 doors as repair parts, not to fix trucks, but to take them apart and study the construction. Industry consultant Jim Sanfilippo captured the absurdity perfectly when he said that if he were a GM engineer working on the next truck, he'd be scratching his head a little bit. They're probably telling the marketing people that they're already lining up their aluminum suppliers. This is the part that turned the whole saga into an industry joke. The same company running grizzly bear ads about the dangers of aluminum was simultaneously building an aluminum truck of their own. In 2019, the Chevrolet Silverado launched with aluminum doors, hood, and tailgate. Every attack ad, every toolbox test, every marketing dollar spent convincing buyers that aluminum was dangerous. And 3 years later, GM did exactly what Ford did. The aluminum F-150 wasn't just a material change. It was proof that the biggest competitive advantages come from doing what your industry says is impossible and being right before anyone else catches up. Ford's F-Series has now been America's best-selling truck for 48 consecutive years. Average transaction prices exceed $47,000. Real-world insurance data showed the aluminum trucks actually cost less to repair than the steel ones they replaced. Here's the detail that makes this story complicated, though. The same bold bet that gave Ford its advantage also created a single point of failure. When a fire hit their primary aluminum supplier's plant in September 2025, it cost Ford an estimated $1.5 to $2 billion, roughly 100,000 trucks in lost production. The supply chain they built for this gamble became the vulnerability that hurt them a decade later. The question now isn't whether aluminum was the right choice. Every competitor has already answered that by following Ford's lead. The question is what the next F-150 gamble looks like, and whether Ford can pull it off again before someone else does.